Hello, I'm Alma Angeles and you're watching Eagle News International. On tonight's headlines. More than half of people in Europe are on track to contract the Omicron coronavirus variant in the next 2 months if infections continue at current rates, according to the head of the WHO's Europe region. A 6.6 magnitude quake hit off the west coast of Cyprus early Tuesday, according to the U.S. Geological Survey. And North Korea fired a suspected ballistic missile into the sea on Tuesday, with South Korea's military warning the second such weapons test in less than a week showed clear signs of progress. And U.S. surgeons successfully implanted a heart from a genetically modified pig in a 57-year-old man, a medical first that could one day help solve the chronic shortage of organ donations.
In this way, from an animal.
First in our news, more than half of people in Europe are on track to contract the Omicron coronavirus variant in the next 2 months if infections continue at current rates, according to the head of the WHO's Europe region. Here's Dr. Hans Klug. Let's listen in.
The dominant virus Today, the Omicron variant represents a new west to east tidal wave sweeping across the region on top of the Delta surge that all countries were managing until late 2021. At this rate, the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation forecasts that more than 50% of the population in the region will be infected with Omicron in the next 6 to 8 weeks. 50 of the 53 countries in Europe and Central Asia have now reported cases of Omicron. It is quickly becoming the dominant virus in Western Europe and is now spreading into the Balkans. Data collated in recent weeks confirms that Omicron is highly transmissible because the mutations it has enabled it to adhere to human cells more easily. And it can infect even those who have been previously infected or vaccinated. Allow me to reiterate that the currently approved vaccines do continue to provide good protection against severe disease and death, including for Omicron.
Now, Europe has been at the epicenter of alarming new outbreaks. Hospital admissions and deaths are creeping up as well. And the World Health Organization said Tuesday, Omicron could infect half of all people in the region at current infection rates. And the Philippines logged 28,007 new coronavirus infections and 4,471 recoveries today. The latest COVID-19 bulletin showed that there are 181,016 active cases, while total recoveries rose to 2,792,946, or 92.3% of 3,026,473 infections since the pandemic started in March 2020. Tuesday's tally of fresh cases is lower than Monday's 33,169. The regions with the most cases in the recent 2 weeks were the National Capital Region with 15,256 or 55% of new infections, Calabarzon with 5,861 or 21%, and Central Luzon with 3,064 or 11%. The death toll is now 52,511 with 219 new deaths, representing 1.74% of overall cases. In a related news, the Octa Research Group today described the COVID-19 situation in the National Capital Region a severe outbreak, with the average daily attack rate, or ADAR, rising to 89.42% from January 4 to the 10th. In the latest report, the Octa Research Group said NCR's current ADAR is above the threshold for a severe outbreak, which is greater than 75 per 100,000 individuals per day. The region's ADAR for the week of of December 28 to January 3 this year was only 12.71. Its recent 7-day positivity rate increased to 48% from 20% for the previous week. Positivity rate is the percentage of COVID-19 tests performed which turned out positive in a certain area or region. The reproduction number, or the number of individuals a COVID-19 case could infect with the virus, has decreased from 5.65 to 5.22, which indicates the trend slowed down slightly, according to Okta. It added the hospital bed occupancy in the NCR has increased to 57% from 27% in the previous week and is likely to exceed 70% next week. With all metrics cited, the NCR is classified as very high risk for COVID-19. Meanwhile, the Food and Drug Administration has granted a compassionate special permit, or CSP, for the COVID-19 treatment drug Bexovid, the first generic version of Pfizer's Paxlovid. Bexovid may be used for individuals with mild to moderate symptoms of COVID-19, ages 12 years old and above. It can reduce risks of hospitalization and deaths by 88 to 89% when taken within 3 to 5 days from the onset of symptoms. Take a look.
Inaprubahan na ng Food and Drug Administration or FDA ang compassionate special permit ng Bexovid, ang first generic version ng Pfizer Paxlovid. Ano po ang implikasyon nito? Magiging mas mura ang gamutan at ma-access ang gamot na ito sa DOH at government hospitals. Mapabawasan ng Bexovid ang risk ng hospitalization or death by 89% kung may bibigay sa pasyente sa loob ng unang 3 araw ng sintomas.
At ito'y unang nakita po at na-examine at na-research doon sa Pfizer sa USA, at nakita nila sa data ho nila sa lahat ng mga pasyenteng nabigyan po nito, nag-reduce ang kanilang hospitalization and death to about 90%. Ang unang antiviral kasi na lumabas sa market, sa merkado, ay yung molnupiravir. Isa din yung antiviral drug na ginawa ng Merck. Pero ngayon, sa kakalabas ngayon ng mga resulta, mga 30 to 40% ang kanyang reduction in hospitalization and death. So itong Bexcovid ngayon, ito yung trade name ng nirmatrelvir, o sa US, ito yung Paxlovid. Itong antiviral na po ito yung may bigay sa mga pasyenteng with mild and moderate, lalong-lalo na sa mga high risk, no? Kasi talagang bababa ang kanyang hospitalization and even death. Ngayon, itong Paxlovid to be given in 5 days at nasa isang package nga yan sa itong Bexclovid or Paxlovid for the next 5 days. Ito'y talagang makakabigay ng medyo pag-asa sa ating 2022, lalong-lalo na itong pag-harap natin sa COVID-19. At least meron na tayong mga gamot aside from the vaccination that we are pursuing.
Paxlovid was first authorized for use in the U.S. The treatment is a combination of 2 tablets, namely nirmatrelvir and ritonavir, and it is taken twice a day for 5 days. Nirmatrelvir inhibits a SARS-CoV-2 protein to stop the virus from replicating. Ritonavir, meanwhile, helps nirmatrelvir to remain in the body for a longer period at higher concentrations. Only healthcare workers employed in hospitals are allowed to have shorter quarantine and under extreme circumstances, according to Malacanang today. This after some airline companies requested to shorten the quarantine and isolation protocols for flight crew. Now, based on Interagency Task Force for the Management of Emerging Infectious Diseases rules, Acting Presidential Spokesperson Cabinet Secretary Carlo Nograles said healthcare workers are allowed to follow shorter quarantine and isolation protocols as determined by their respective hospitals' Infection Prevention and Control Committee. Again, let's listen in.
basahin nyo yung resolution, yung latest resolution ng IATF, nakalagay po doon na, for instance, no, for those who are isolated dahil nga meron silang mild or asymptomatic na COVID. So meron tayong rules on number of days for isolation, no? Shinorten lang natin under extreme circumstances, but always po, if it is recommended and with clearance from the hospital. Kasi yung mga hospitals, meron po silang tinatawag na Hospital Infection Prevention and Control Committees. So it is these committees ng hospitals that will determine kung pwede bang ma-shorten. For instance, yung sa naka-quarantine dahil na-expose. So it is the hospitals, the health experts in those hospitals, those committees na mag-assess dun sa mga na-exposed na healthcare workers kung fit na ba sila to be brought back in circulation.
Itong Omicron, even with the spike in cases, are mild. And they found out that because of this high transmissibility, ang incubation period niya is about 2 to 3 days lang. Compared yun sa original kasi original Wuhan virus, COVID-19, yun ang mas mahaba yung incubation period, 5 to 7 days. Kaya matagal mong kailangan ma-isolated, ma-quarantine. Now, itong pag natin sa healthcare workers, alam natin kasi 93% na kasi bakunado. And they are protected in a way against the virus, especially this Omicron for hospitalization and even death. And ang reason naman na naging 5 days yan for the, especially for the asymptomatics, is because we believe that on the 5th day, if you're vaccinated, the viral load is very low, and you can no longer transmit the virus to, or you are not contagious. So ito yung talagang dahilan kung bakit inuna natin ang healthcare workers, kasi madali sila ma-monitor ng kanilang infection and control committee dyan sa hospital. So they're being monitored, and besides, they are also fully vaccinated, not 93% even with booster. Now, ang gagawin po namin, nag-propose na rin ng DOH na i-streamline natin to sa general public, because para to harmonize the isolation and quarantine protocols, we would like it's proposed by the Department of Health, and of course this proposal will be sent to the IATF for consideration and approval, na mag-isolate na po tayo once, kasi 60% naman natin ngayon dito sa bansa Omicron, and basically we can actually isolate the asymptomatic cases for especially if you're vaccinated for 5 days, similar to the healthcare workers.
Meanwhile, Cathay Pacific is being investigated and faces possible legal action over an Omicron variant coronavirus outbreak in Hong Kong that began with the airline's employees, according to the city's leader today. The revelation came as Chief Executive Carrie Lam announced the suspension of all kindergarten and primary schools until after the Lunar New Year in early February. Again, let's listen in.
Another investigation which a lot of people have put attention to is the Cathay Pacific, whether this airline has complied with the regulations that we imposed on the airline when we granted the exemption for the air cargo crew in order to ensure that Hong Kong's air cargo flow could continue to sustain the operation of the city. Okay? Cathay Pacific is a very big non-compliance because the air cargo crew should not have gone out during the quarantine at home. And worse still, if we discover through full investigations that some crew of Cathay Pacific or some staff of Cathay Pacific should not have been traveling back on a cargo flight and enjoying this exemption, that would be a much bigger non-compliance. But this has to be put under full investigation. And we will take the legal action once we have the full evidence of what wrong it has gone into.
Like China, Hong Kong maintains a strict zero-COVID strategy that has kept cases low, but largely cut the international finance hub off from both the mainland and the rest of the world for the last 2 years. A recent outbreak traced to Cathay Air crew who breached home quarantine has sparked a dramatic tightening of already strict social distancing controls and travel restrictions, causing renewed anger among residents and businesses. The revelation piles new pressure on Cathay Pacific, which has been decimated by the pandemic and has no domestic market to fall back on in a city that used to be a major Asian transport and logistics hub. Cargo flights, the one area where the airline made some cash, have been slashed recently because new quarantine rules imposed on crew has left managers struggling to find enough pilots. Last month, AFP reported that Cathay pilots were leaving in droves. Lam's government is facing growing anger over there being no end in sight in zero COVID controls at a time when rival business hubs are learning to live with the virus. Meanwhile, 5 million residents of a central Chinese city were confined to their homes Tuesday, while another megacity shuttered all non-essential businesses as the country battles a spate of coronavirus outbreaks, including from the Omicron variant. Fast-spreading Omicron presents a fresh challenge. With 2 cases in Anyang, the newly locked down city in Henan province, linked to a growing infection cluster in the northern metropolis of Tianjin, some 400 kilometers away. Authorities in Anyang announced the lockdown late on Monday, issuing a notice ordering residents not to leave their homes or drive cars on the roads, according to Xinhua. Now, all non-essential businesses have been closed and a mass testing drive has been launched to respond to the severe epidemic control situation and strictly prevent the spread of the Omicron virus outbreak, according to Xinhua. There were 58 new local infections reported in Anyang, according to CCTV, bringing the city's total caseload to 84 since Saturday. The city had already restricted outbound travel, which local officials said was to ensure that the outbreak doesn't spill over into outside areas. At least 3 cities in Henan are battling emerging outbreaks, with provincial capital Jiangsu's 13 million inhabitants inching closer to a full lockdown. Under current rules, schools and kindergartens have been closed, along with all non-essential businesses. And Beijing is on high alert as it prepares to host the Winter Olympics next month. Meanwhile, Japan will extend measures barring almost all new foreign arrivals until the end of February and reopen mass vaccination centers as it battles an Omicron-fueled coronavirus surge, according to the government today. We will keep the current border control policy until the end of February while taking necessary measures from a humanitarian viewpoint and considering the national interest, according to Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. Local media said there would be some new exemptions for members of Japanese families as well as students studying in Japan, but there were no immediate details from officials. The government will also reopen large-scale vaccination centers run by the self-defense forces and ask local governments to reopen their own mass inoculation sites to accelerate booster shots, according to Kishida. Japan has imposed strict border control measures, such as quarantine and frequent testing on those entering the country from abroad. But despite those efforts, the Omicron variant has been circulating locally, and Japan is seeing a sharp rise in virus cases. The government has already approved new virus restrictions for 3 regions, and U.S. forces in Japan have barred troops from non-essential off-base trips for 2 weeks after clusters of cases emerged in the military and surrounding communities. Overall, Japan's infection rate remains comparatively low, with 8,249 cases reported nationwide on Sunday, but the numbers are rising, and the Sunday figure was among the highest levels since September. The country has recorded just over 18,400 deaths in the pandemic. And experts said Monday that an alleged hybrid coronavirus mutation dubbed Deltacron, reportedly discovered in a Cyprus lab, is most likely the result of a lab contamination and not a new worrying variant. Cypriot media reported the discovery Saturday, describing it as having the genetic background of the Delta variant along with some of the mutations of Omicron. While it is possible for coronaviruses to genetically combine, it is rare, and scientists analyzing the discovery of the so-called Deltacron says it is unlikely. Tom Peacock, a virologist with the Infectious Diseases Department at Imperial College London, tweeted over the weekend, quote, "The Cypriot Deltacron sequences reported by several large media outlets look to be quite clearly contamination." Scientists are eager to battle a deluge of disinformation about COVID-19, much of it circulating online. Last week, unverified reports emerged of a flurona or fluorone virus circulating, a combination of the flu and the coronavirus, which the World Health Organization dismissed Monday. And the tragic collapse of a cliff that left 10 people dead in Brazil on Saturday was caused by torrential rains, and more disasters could be on the way, according to meteorologist Estael Cias. 2 months of downpours have caused deadly flooding in several Brazilian states, including Bahia in the northeast and Minas Gerais in the southeast, where a huge column of rock crashed down on tourists on boats on Furnace Lake. According to CS, who works for the state meteorology agency Metsul, global warming is provoking an ever greater number of natural disasters. He said there is certainly a relationship between the heavy rains and the cliff collapsing. It is a fact, he said, that the long and intense period of rains generated an infiltration of water in the rocks that caused the rocks to move and the fall of the cliff face. Several videos showed that minutes earlier there was a huge amount of rain falling down on the waterfalls in the region, putting great pressure on the rocks. Cia said heavy summer rains are caused by the South Atlantic Convergence Zone, or ZCAS, a phenomenon created by a humid corridor from the Amazon rainforest meeting a cold front from the south. And that generates large amounts of rain that result in frequent floods or landslides in several states. Another meteorological phenomenon called La Nina, which provokes a cooling of the Pacific Ocean, causing heavy rains in some parts of the world and drought in others, also contributes to an increased rainfall. Heavy rain is forecast for the next 10 days, and unfortunately, that could mean more disasters, according to CS. In other news, a 6.6 magnitude quake hit off the west coast of Cyprus early on Tuesday, according to the U.S. Geological Survey, but there were no immediate reports of casualties or damage. Let's listen to the mayor.
Γύρω στις 3 το πρωί, ξημερώματα, ένας μεγάλος σεισμός, περίπου γύρω στα 6,4 ρίχτερ και με διάρκεια γύρω στα 20-25 δευτερόλεπτα. Είχε τερακουνήσει την περιοχή μας. Ήταν ένας πάρα πολύ δυνατός σεισμός. Δεν είμαστε συνηθισμένοι σε τέτοιους σεισμούς. Ο κόσμος έχει φοβηθεί. Όλοι είχαν ξυπνήσει και όλοι είχαν τρομοκρατηθεί. Ελπίζουμε να μην υπάρξει συνέχεια σε αυτόν να υπάρχουν οποιασδήποτε άλλες σεισμικές αναταράξεις. Ευτυχώς δεν υπήρχαν οποιασδήποτε ζημιές και υπάρχει ασφάλεια, δεν υπάρχουν οποιαδήποτε τραυματισμοί.
The USGS said the strong and relatively shallow quake at 01:07 GMT was centered 48 kilometers west-northwest of the town of Polis on the Mediterranean island. And the tremor was felt across Cyprus and around the region, with reports from as far away as Turkey, Israel, and Lebanon. It shook buildings in the capital Nicosia, 130 kilometers away, and some of those who were awake went out into the streets. The European Mediterranean Seismological Center measured the tremor at 6 6.5 magnitude at a depth of 51 kilometers, and Cyprus lies in a secondary earthquake-prone zone. But tremors of such magnitude are uncommon. The biggest quake in recent years was a magnitude 6.8 back in 1996, which killed 2 people in Paphos on the island's west coast. In 1953, a 6.3 magnitude quake killed 40 people and destroyed hundreds of homes, mostly in the Paphos region. And 1 month after the floods in southwest France, the Gave d'Oloron is once again overflowing its banks in Peyro-Horeb, a small town in the Landes region, flooding several houses in its path. Take a look.
Oui, tout à fait. Ça a débordé, donc un peu moins que ce que l'avait donc prévu Vigicru, bon, à 5 cm près, mais sur la fourchette basse, mais comme ça a débordé, c'est quand même rentré dans la maison.
Meteo France predicts an episode of unusually heavy and sustained downpour. 3 departments are also under orange weather alerts for high river levels and is on an avalanche warning. Authorities said in areas affected by the rainfall, people should try to stay at home if possible, avoid driving, and make sure to keep away from bodies of water and bridges if they don't need to go out. Authorities also said it's advisable to move damageable possessions upstairs if you live near a river or other waterway, and not to go down into the cellar or basement. And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.